Elder. I want to again greet everyone in the name of the Lord. We want to thank God for the opportunity He has given us again today so that we can meet, pray together, and consider His word. I'm going also to emphasize that as we are going through our lessons, whenever we have questions or where we need clarification or anything, may we give it to our elder so that we can address it, and then we may be able to move together. So I'll start by just giving a recap of what we have looked at so far quickly. However, I would be giving this recap from a different angle because there are things now that I can easily say because we now have the background. So we say that the book of Daniel, we find that there are four main lines of prophecy that we find, that is in Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, and Daniel chapter 11. And this week we've been looking at Daniel chapter 10, which primarily is a prologue or an introduction to the narration of a prophecy that we find from Daniel chapter 11, verse 1 onwards. Now, in Daniel chapter 2, the main emphasis of that prophecy was to outline how the worldly powers would come one after the other until Christ himself shall set up his kingdom. So basically, it was a prophecy from God of how things are going to be and how God is involved in setting up and removing the kingdoms. That is Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 7, God gives Daniel another line of prophecy. This time around, he receives the same information as he did in Daniel chapter 2 when the vision was given to Nebuchadnezzar. But the difference is in Daniel chapter 7, more light was being given. The main emphasis was on the little horn and the activities of the little horn. So you'd find that from Daniel chapter 7, verse 1, quickly we see the lion, the bear, and the leopard, and then we get to the beast, and then we get to the 10 horns. Then the little horn is explained. Then the end of the little horn is explained when God gave Daniel a vision of the judgment, and then emphasis is given that the books are going to be opened, and the little horn is going to be judged according to its work, and its end shall thereof come. And if you read onwards after that, when the angel came, Gabriel, and explained the vision to Daniel, his main question in Daniel chapter 7 was, I want to understand more about the little horn. Then the angel explained about the little horn, and then at the end, in verse 27, he comes back again to the main issue to say, the little horn shall think to change times, and everything shall weigh out the saints, and all the things that are said about the little horn. But at the end of the day, the judgment shall sit, and the dominion of the little horn is going to be taken away. Now, Daniel did understand everything about the powers that shall come and how Christ was to set up his kingdom. But when the prophecy introduced the aspect of judgment in relation to the little horn, Daniel had questions. Therefore, he needed more light on that. So years after that prophecy, Daniel was considering the prophecies and he was praying for more light, especially to do with the judgment. Hence, we are introduced to Daniel chapter 8, where Daniel was given another line of vision, which is a third line of vision in the book of Daniel. This time around, the emphasis was exactly on the question of Daniel to say, I need to understand more about the judgment. Yes, in Daniel chapter 7, we explain the judgment, especially in connection with the little horn and how the end shall be. However, I need more light with regards to the judgment. Hence, the prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 came, but centrally was the issue of judgment as the main emphasis of the prophecy of Daniel chapter 8. Now, In Daniel chapter 8, the prophecy now starts not with Babylon, but with Medo-Persia. Okay, why Medo-Persia? Because the emphasis of Daniel chapter 8 was on the 2,300 days, which was going to commence during the time of Medo-Persia. That's number one. Number two, the decree, which was to be the commencement of the 2,300-day prophecy, was also going to be given by Medo-Persia. Hence, unlike in Daniel chapter 2, where we start with Babylon, that is the head of gold, in Daniel chapter 7, where we start with the lion, that is also Babylon, in Daniel chapter 8, we start with Medo-Persia, because the focus of Daniel chapter 8 is on the 2,300-day prophecy, which has to do with the cleansing of the sanctuary. That is number one. Number two, also the nature of the vision. In Daniel chapter 7, we are given lions, bears, leopards, but in Daniel chapter 8, we are given sanctuary animals, the ram and the goat. And you would know that especially on the Day of Atonement, 2 goats were put aside for that ceremony. Hence, we are given sanctuary animals, the ram and the goat. Why? Because the emphasis of Daniel chapter 8 is to do with the 2,300-day prophecy, which has to do with the cleansing of the sanctuary. So quickly, things are outlined how they're going to be. And in vision, Daniel sees one saint asking another, until when shall these things be? Because as Daniel was watching, he saw a notable horn, which was having issues with the sanctuary of the Lord, casting down the sanctuary of the horse and everything. And then the answer was, unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. And we saw yesterday that the angel came and explained everything. But when it came to the 2,300, he told Daniel, shut this vision. It concerns the time of the end. That's how Daniel chapter 8 ends. So, still Daniel, in Daniel chapter 9, we find him praying again, seeking more knowledge. And the angel comes and explains the 70 weeks or the first part of the 2,300-day prophecy. But he did not touch on the 2,300-day ending or events to do with that. He simply explained the commencement, the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and the coming of the Messiah, which leads us to Daniel chapter 10. Now, where we are this week. In Daniel chapter 10, Daniel now is introduced to more information with regards, especially to the issues to do with the unexplained part of the 2,300-day prophecy. So how does it start? From verse 1, it starts from Medo-Persia, and it goes through all the history until it gets to a point where Daniel is given a more complete picture, where we receive a prophecy that has to do with everything to do with the end of the 2,300-day prophecy, the cleansing of the sanctuary, the judgment, the end of probation, the time of trouble, and everything up until the coming of the Messiah. Hence, eventually in Daniel chapter 11, Daniel receives a complete view, and when the narration of the prophecy ends in Daniel chapter 12, he is told again, when it comes to the issues to do with the last day events, Daniel, you need to seal the book and shut the vision, for it concerns the time of the end. Then finally, Daniel says, I understood. That is, if you read Daniel 10 verse 1, he saw a thing or a word or a narration of a vision, and he understood. What did he understand? He understood issues to do with his time, and he understood that there were certain issues that were to do with the time of the end. And that is what we have been looking at so far. Now, in introducing Daniel chapter 10, I'm going to share my screen so that we see where we are now. In introducing Daniel chapter 10, the last line of vision that we find from Daniel chapter 10 to Daniel chapter 12, we see Christ himself coming as we saw yesterday. Verse 5 says, "Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color the polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude." And we noted that we also meet this being in Revelation chapter 1, and we also meet this being in Revelation chapter 10, and this is Christ himself. So when the final aspect of the prophecies of Daniel was being given, when he was now receiving the last line of prophecy, which was to complete and give light and give all the remaining details, especially to do with the end of time, Christ himself comes to give Daniel the prophecy. Now, he is given this prophecy, and then he is told to seal up the prophecy. Now, in Revelation chapter 10, we saw the same Christ coming again now to reveal the unsealing of the prophecy, which is where we ended yesterday. Verse 1 of Revelation 10 says, "And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were a sun, and his feet as pillars of fire." So we see that at the sealing of this part of prophecy, Christ is revealed. And at the unsealing of this part of the prophecy in the book of Revelation, Christ is also revealed. Now, where was it sealed? At the end of the prophecy, for those who just joined us, from Daniel chapter 10, Daniel sees the vision. When he sees the vision, the angel comes and starts to explain to him the prophecy. He explains it from verse 1 of Daniel chapter 11 up to verse 4 of Daniel chapter 12. So the events from Daniel chapter 10 to Daniel chapter 12, they all happened at once. It's only those who were organizing the Bible who separated this single event into 3 chapters. Now, when the event ends, or when the narration ends of the prophecy, that is where we pick it up from Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. It reads, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Men shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other 2, the one on the side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river. Verse 6, "And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, How long shall it be to the end of these wonders?" So the same question that was asked in Daniel chapter 8 is the same question that is being asked at the end of the prophecy of Daniel chapter 11. Why? Because Daniel chapter 11 was a further explanation of the prophecy of the 2,300 days that we find in Daniel chapter 8. And the answer comes in verse 7 and says, "And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, and he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever, that it shall be a times and half, and half, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished." So we notice that the answer is it shall be times and half a time. We have met this aspect in Daniel chapter 7. Basically, it is 1,260 years, which commences from 538 BC and ends in 1798. Verse 8 says, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" Then he was answered, and he said, verse 9, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end." Yes, the portion in the book of Daniel, from Daniel chapter 8 to Daniel chapter 12, that portion of the book of Daniel, which had to do with the time of the end, was sealed. Hence, in the book of Daniel, we have a portion which is sealed. Okay? Now, in Revelation chapter 10, that sealed book is unsealed. What happens? Verse 1, we read it. We saw Christ coming again as he came in Daniel chapter 10. Verse 2 reads as follows. And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea and his left foot upon the earth. Verse 3 reads, and he cried with a loud voice as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. Verse 4, and when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write. This is John in vision in the book of Revelation. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not. That is verse 4. Continuing verse 5, and the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven. I want you to notice, we saw this also in Daniel chapter 12, where an angel lifted up his hands towards heaven and swore by him that live forever and ever. We see the same thing happening here. When verse 5, and the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven, verse 6, and swore by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, that they should be time no longer. In chapter 12, the question was asked, unto when shall these things be? The answer was, unto a time, times and half a time. This time around, the angel raises up his hand, swears by him who lives forever, and says time shall no longer be. In other words, in Daniel chapter 12, we have a prophecy which says this book is sealed until the end of time, times and half a time. In Revelation chapter 10 says, no, what is now happening here in Revelation chapter 10 is a prophecy of a point in time when there is no longer time. In other words, time, times and half a time is expired. We have reached the end of time. Now the book is no longer closed, but the book is now open. Verse 8, and the voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again and said, go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. And I went unto the angel and said unto him, give me the little book. And he said unto me, take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. So the prophet John in vision, as he is seeing this little book, there is an announcement which has been made. Time shall no longer be, okay? There will no longer be time any longer. Then he is instructed, take the book and eat it. Therefore, John in vision, he acts out the prophecy. So his actions also become part and parcel of a prophecy. It was as if John was now at the end of time and representing those people who shall live at the end of time. He took the book which before was sealed, but now has been opened and ate it. In other words, he was representing the last day people who are going to be able to read the prophecy, understand it, and live it and preach it in preparation for the coming of Christ. Verse 9 reads, and I went unto the angel and said unto him, give me the little book. And he said unto me, take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth as sweet as honey. So take the book, eat it. As you eat it, it will be sweet in the mouth, but it is going to be bitter in the honey. That is verse 9. Verse 10 reads, and I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey, and as sweet as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. What is John eating? John eating is eating that portion of the book of Daniel which was sealed, but now is being unsealed. Okay? What the former prophet Daniel was told, no, seal it, it concerns the time of the end. John was told, no, eat it, now is the time. Verse 7, I'll read again just so that we get the context, especially of verse 7. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. And he said unto me, thou must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. So before he was eating the book, okay, when it was bitter in the belly, he's being told prophesy again, which means now we have an interpretation of the prophecy. The eating of the book symbolized the prophesying, because after eating it, and when it was bitter in the mouth, he's told prophesy again. Okay, we shall shed more light onto that one. Then verse 1 of Revelation chapter 11. So there is a continuation, okay, from Revelation chapter 10, the earlier verse, verse 11. It continues to the following verse, though it's now another chapter. It says, and there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. In other words, this was now the commencement of the measurement of the temple of God. In Matthew chapter 7, the Bible says, don't judge others, okay? Because with the same measure that you judge others, that same measure you shall also be judged. So soon after being told to prophesy again, verse 1 says, and there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar, and them that worship therein. If they are being measured, it means now they are being judged. So John was in a vision, out events that will take place at the time of the end, which means at the time of judgment. Verse 2, but the court which is without the temple, leave out and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy seed shall they tread underfoot for 42 months. In other words, this judgment only concerns those who are within the temple. This judgment only concerns those whose names are in the heavenly books. The judgment concerns only God's people, because the rest shall be judged at a later stage. Now, allow me, brethren, to comment now about what we saw in Daniel chapter 12. Now that we have a picture of what's happening, let's look at it closely. The vision that John sees in Revelation chapter 10, and he partakes in vision in acting out, he is seeing something that was to take place in the future. But when exactly was it going to happen? When was this eating of the book and this prophesying going to happen? In Daniel chapter 12, the same question was asked, and the answer came and said, a time, times, and half a time. Okay? Now, allow me to remind you, time in Bible prophecy, we won't look at it. It is my hope that you have an idea, but if not, just let me quickly go through it. Time in Bible prophecy symbolizes a year, okay? That's why the Bible says Nebuchadnezzar went and ate a grass like a beast for 7 times, which is 7 years. So a time is a year. Times means 2 years. Half a time is half a year. And a year in Jewish reckoning is 360 days. So if we say time, times, and half a time, we're saying a year, 2 years and half a year, okay? So that is 3 times 3 years plus half a year, that is half of 360. If you do the math, it will give you a total of 1,260 days. And a day symbolizes a year, which gives you 1,260 years, which commences, as we know, from 538 AD to 1798, all right? Now, follow me very closely, what we are looking at now. The question was asked in Daniel chapter 8, until when shall these things be? And the answer was unto 2,300 days. Okay? We know that the 2,300 days commences from 457 BC and expires in 1844. But the times and half a time does not expire in 1844. It ends in 1798. Please follow me closely. So the question in Daniel chapter 8 is until when? The answer was until 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. In other words, the cleansing of the sanctuary will take place in 1844. Then Daniel is given another vision, okay, in Daniel chapter 11, which ends in Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. And then the question is asked, until when shall these things be? Okay, why in Daniel chapter 11 there was an explanation, okay, a further explanation of events surrounding the 1844, which included, of course, the time just before the commencement of the cleansing of the sanctuary. And the answer was until 1798, or until a time, times, and half a time. Why 1844 in Daniel chapter 8 and why 1798 in Daniel chapter 12? Let's quickly look at it. The reason is very simple. In Daniel chapter 11, the prophecy that Daniel had seen now included exactly when was the time of the end commencing. In Daniel chapter 8, he is simply told this vision concerns later days or the time of the end, but he is not told exactly when will the time of the end commence. The time of the commencement of the time of the end is explained in Daniel chapter 11. Now, like I said, we are going to look closely at Daniel chapter 11 in our next sessions, but allow me today just to borrow one verse so that this may make clear. And that verse I'm borrowing is Daniel chapter 11, and the verse is 40. It reads, and at that time of the end, are you following? The time of the what? Of the end. Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. And at that time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. So allow me here to be unfair and just tell you this. We are going to study it in our next session. The king of the south here is symbolizing or representing the kingdom of France. And the king of the north is, of course, symbolizing or representing the papal supremacy. During the Dark Ages, the papacy ruled the whole world. The Pope was both a religious leader and a political leader. He was, so to say, an emperor of the world. But in 1798, France pushed against the papacy. Why? Because Napoleon did imprison the Pope in 1798, which was a blow to the papacy, and he introduced the republicanism to the whole world. Now governments ceased to be monarchical. Republican governments could now be duly elected from 1798 onwards. This is the event being described by Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. It simply says, at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and then the king of the north, of course, shall come as a whirlwind. In other words, there's a time when the king of the north shall regain its power. So in Daniel chapter 11, the commencement of the time of the end is revealed to Daniel. That is why in Daniel chapter 12, the angel can now say, until time, times, and half a time, or until 1798. Why? Because Daniel had been shown when the time of the end is. So what are we saying? The time of the end begins in 1798. And it ends when Jesus comes. So we have a time, a period, which is called the time of the end. Then we have the end itself when Jesus comes. So now we are given a date of the commencement of the time of the end, which is the reason why in Daniel chapter 12, when the narration of the prophecy had ended, it reads, and one said to the men clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? Verse 7, and I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he had held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. In other words, it shall be until 1798. So what did he do? He lifted up his hands, He swears by him that he lives forever and ever, and says these things are going to be till 1798. John sees the vision of a book. Now the book is no longer closed like in Daniel chapter 12. The book is open. As he is seeing that open book, the angel raises up his hand to declare. This one in Daniel chapter 12 raised a hand and declared it's going to be until 1798. In Revelation chapter 10, he raises his hand, swears by him that lives forever, and says, there shall be time no longer. In other words, what John is about to see now commences in 1798 onwards. Okay? So, and then verse 8 says, and I heard, but I understood not. Then I said, oh my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Now, if we read Testimonies to Ministers, page 114, the Spirit of Prophet says, the things revealed to Daniel were afterward complemented by the revelation made to John on the Isle of Patmos. These books should be carefully studied. The book of Daniel is unsealed in the revelation to John and carries us forward to the last scenes of the earth's history. This is why the book, the prophecy that John received is called a revelation. Why is it called a revelation? Because it was now unsealing what Daniel had seen but was sealed to him. Let me give an example. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, it says, and at that time shall Michael stand, he who standeth for his people. And after he stood up, there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. And God's people were delivered, everyone who was found written in the book. We are going to find that in that one verse in Daniel chapter 12, we see Michael standing up, we see the time of trouble commencing, and we see God's people being delivered. A lot of events. If you come to the book of Revelation, you will notice that in Revelation, you have Revelation chapter 15, the entire chapter, simply explaining the standing up of Michael. Then we have Revelation chapter 16 and chapter 17, 2 chapters explaining the time of trouble. Okay? You have 3 entire chapters which are explaining what Daniel said in one verse. In other words, the book, the sealed portion of the book of Daniel is unsealed in the book of Revelation. Another quotation. This one is volume 18 of manuscript releases by Ellen White. The Spirit of Prophecy says here, it was the Lion of the tribe of Judah who unsealed the book and gave to John the revelation of what should be in the last days. Why is she calling him the Lion of Judah? In Revelation chapter 10, we saw that he roars like a lion, and when he roared, 7 thunders thundered. I'll read again. It was the Lion of the tribe of Judah who unsealed the book and gave to John the revelation of what should be in these last days. Daniel stood in his lot to bear his testimony, which was sealed until the time of the end, when the first angel's message should be proclaimed to our world. These matters are of infinite importance to these last days. The book of Daniel is unsealed in the revelation to John, and it carries us forward to the last scenes of the earth's history. But I want you to see something here. I'm going to put a cursor. I hope you are seeing my cursor here. It says here, Daniel stood in his lot to bear his testimony, which was sealed. She says, until the time of the end, comma, when the first angel's message should be proclaimed to our world. Now, it's possible that when Ellen White wrote this, she herself did not exactly understand what she was writing. But the inspiration she got was very true and on point. Follow me. She is saying Daniel stood in his lot to bear his testimony, which was sealed. We don't have a problem with that. We know that the book was sealed. We saw that in Daniel chapter 12. Until the time of the end, okay? Until the time of the end, which is the time of the end? Daniel chapter 11, verse 40 simply said, the time of the end is when France shall attack the papacy. So we don't have a problem with that. And then she says, when the first angel's message should be proclaimed. When was the first angel's message proclaimed? The first angel's message was not proclaimed in 1844. It was proclaimed before 1844. What does the first angel's message say? Let me say that. But before that, why before 1844? Because the book was not unsealed in 1844. The book was unsealed from 1798 onwards. So we have 1798, 99, 1800. By 1816, William Miller is studying and he starts to understand the 2000 day prophecy. Why? It was before 1844, but it was already unsealed, which means the time of the end indeed was from 1798. Hence, when she says the book was sealed until the time of the end, when the first angel's message should be proclaimed, she was inspirationally on point. What is the first angel's message? The first angel's message says, then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto all the nations, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God, for the hour of his judgment come. So this message was saying the hour of judgment is what? Coming when? In 1844. Hence, the time of the end had begun. So the book of Daniel is unsealed in Revelation, as we saw in Revelation chapter 10. Now, with this understanding, let's quickly go over Revelation chapter 10 and see the events which transpired from 1798 onwards. I hope we are following. Now we know which time is the time of the end. Therefore, when John saw in vision the mighty angel coming with an open book, John was seeing the mighty angel we saw in Daniel chapter 10, revealing the prophecy to Daniel and instructing him to seal it. The fact that John saw this book open in verse 2 of Revelation chapter 10, it means that he was seeing a vision of events which were to take place from 1798 onwards. Now that is clear, what was to take place after 1798? Let's continue to read. Verse 2 says, and he had in his book a little book. Why is it called a little book? Because it's not the entire book of Daniel that was sealed, but a portion to do with the 2100 day prophecy. In other words, only Daniel 8 to 12, portions of Daniel 8 to 12 were sealed. He had in his hand a little book open and set his right foot upon the sea and his left upon the earth. Now we are ready to see what happened in 1798, because this book is already open. And he cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. Verse 4, and when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not. Now, the book is open. As the book is open, Christ says something. John hears what Christ said because he was about to write it down. But he was told, don't write it down. The fact that he did not write it down, but something happened to us or to those who were living after 1798, something, they heard thunder instead of hearing exactly what had happened. What does that mean? There's a day when God spoke and said, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. The Greeks heard what God had said, but the rest of the people said, we heard a thunder, if you read John chapter 12. So John heard in this chapter what was said, and he was about to write, but he was so told, no, don't write it. So what was happening here? I saw the people of God, early writings, page 235, paragraph number 3. I saw the people of God joyful in expectation, looking for their Lord. But God had designed to prove them. His hand covered a mistake in the reckoning of the prophetic periods. Those who were looking for their Lord did not discover this mistake, and the most learned men who opposed the time also failed to see it. God designed that his people should meet with a disappointment. Now that we know that the events transpiring from verse 2 onwards of Revelation chapter 10 were happening after 1798. What was happening after 1798? The Millerites were preaching, Jesus is coming, judgment is coming in 1844. Now, they were right about saying there's judgment coming in 1844. They were right about saying Christ is coming in 1844. But they were wrong about saying Christ was coming to the earth. Because Daniel 7 is very clear. Christ came to the Ancient of Days. Christ moved from the holy place to the most holy place. So that's the mistake they were making. And that mistake was not their doing. It was God's doing. God covered so that they may not see it. Hence, this covering that God did is represented in Revelation chapter 10 by the 7 thunders which they thundered, and John was told, do not write. Volume 7 of Bible Commentary, the SOP says, the special light given to John, which was expressed in the 7 thunders, was a delineation of events which would transpire under the first and second angels' messages. It was not best for the people to know these things, for their faith must necessarily be tested. Why was God covering this mistake? The problem of the 1844 movement was that there were 2 groups of people who were preaching about the coming of Christ in 1844. The first group was those who were sincere and in spirit and truth waited for the coming of Christ in 1844. But there were those who just joined out of excitement, and there were some who joined for fear of judgment, and the group swelled into a large number. Okay, and the group swelled, but God wanted to bring a shaking. Why? Because in 1844, a special work was starting in heaven, a work of the cleansing of the sanctuary. And the cleansing of the sanctuary simply meant God was cleansing the sins of the people from the heavenly books in heaven. For that to happen, he needed clean people on earth. And to get clean people on earth, while there was a movement which included people who joined for the sake of joining, not because they were genuine. He needed to shake God's people. And he did that by making sure that he covers. And God's people had a mistake. They thought Christ is coming. So that they were going to be disappointment. The disappointment separated the chaff from the wheat. After October 22, after the disappointment, those who had joined the church or the movement for the sake of joining or for the fear of judgment quickly said, we knew it, something was wrong about this, and they left the Advent movement. But there are those who said, God cannot make a mistake. There must be something about our understanding. Though they were severely disappointed, they held on. It is to those who held on that Jesus revealed finally the mistake. No. There is a sanctuary light you missed. I was not coming back to take you, but I was moving to start the process of the cleansing of the sanctuary. And God started a clean slate of cleansing in heaven with the clean people here on earth. So the great disappointment was designed. It was not a mistake. It's represented by the 7 thunders that we saw. Let's finish off. Verse 5. And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven. We saw this lifting of hands in Daniel chapter 12. And he swore by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and things therein, and the earth and things therein, and the sea and things therein, that there should be time no longer. What basically verse 6 is saying, he is swearing by him who created. In other words, he's swearing by the creator. Why is he evoking the creator? Because towards 1844, they were discovering the Sabbath, the truth, which is the essence of the first angel's message. Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of judgment is come to give God the glory is to reveal his character, and his character is his law. So the first angel's message was simply saying, guys, let's keep the law of God in its entirety. Let's keep the Sabbath. Why? The judgment is about to begin. We are going to be judged according to the law. Hence, verse 6 is saying, he swore by him who lives forever, who created. Why? Because during this time, the Sabbath was now central. And then the last part of the verse says, and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer. In other words, there is no longer any time prophecy to be set, because the longest time period was to end in 1844. Others have ended already in 1798. So this was a confirmation or the end of what we saw in Daniel chapter 12. Verse 8 of Revelation says, and the voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me, and said, go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel, which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. And I went unto the angel and said unto him, give me the little book. And he said unto me, take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, and it shall be in thy mouth as sweet as honey. What happened towards 1844? The message was sweet. As they were preaching about the coming of Christ, if you study about the Great Advent movement in 1844, they could not even harvest. The corn was left fully ripened but not harvested. Why? People were excited about the coming of Christ. The news, the book was sweet. The revelation of the coming of Christ, or of the time of judgment, or of the 2,100 days, was very sweet to the saints. But when the disappointment came, it was bitter. Hence, he is told it's going to be sweet in the mouth and bitter in the tongue. Verse 10, and I took the little book. John is representing the Advent movement, the people in the last days after 1798. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. So the eating it is the events that happened up to 1844, when they were preaching about the coming of Christ. Churches were full. Then it became bitter. That was the disappointment of October 1844. After the disappointment, another message comes, which is verse 11. And he said unto me, thou must prophesy again before many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. In other words, the fact that the angel is saying, prophesy again means do again what you did before. So you ate the book and it was bitter. Okay, now eat it again. In other words, the eating of the book was the preaching of the three angels' messages. Now he's being told to prophesy again to who? Before many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings, invoking the language of the first angel's messages. I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to every tongue, nation, peoples, and tribes. So this is exactly what the angels were saying, prophesy again. So the eating of the book represented the studying of the scriptures and the preaching of the coming of Christ. And the bitter aspect meant that they were disappointment, and now that they had received the light, they were told to prophesy again. Then and there was given me a reed like a rod, and the angel saying, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar, and then that worship there. In other words, after the disappointment, the judgment commenced in heaven, and the judgment simply was meant for only those who exactly are God's people, starting from the dead up to this time. This is a distinctive feature you'd find that we share beliefs with so many churches. It could be the state of the dead, it could be about the coming of Christ, but there is one fundamental belief which is not shared by any other church. We believe in the pre-Advent judgment, that there's going to be an investigatory judgment before Christ comes, because it is something that we were given. It is interwoven in our identity, and our identity is found in Revelation chapter 10, where the movement or the birth of this movement was prophesied. And in signing it up, we were told, measure, take a reed and measure the temple of God and the people that worship there. And therefore, in other words, from this time onwards, a judgment it commenced. I know I was moving very fast so that I could cover everything, but I hope slowly the structure and how things are is all making sense as we look at issues surrounding Revelation, the book of Daniel chapter 10, in introduction of Daniel chapter 11. We are going to end here today. May God bless the reading of his word. Amen.
Amen. Amen.